Major funding for Election 2022 Arkansas PBS Debates is provided by AARP Arkansas, with additional funding provided by the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce.
From the campus of University of Central Arkansas and the studios of Arkansas PBS, it's Election 2022 Arkansas PBS Attorney General Debate.
Stand by, Jim, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Up on Jim and cue Steve.
And hello again, everyone, and welcome again to Debate Week on Arkansas PBS. At this hour, the candidates for Arkansas Attorney General. In alphabetical order, the Democratic nominee, Mr. Jesse Gibson, and the Republican candidate, Tim Griffin. The questions for the debate will come from our Arkansas Public Affairs team, Donna Terrell, also with Fox 16 News in Little Rock, and Christina Munoz with the Natural State Update and Arkansas PBS. I'm Steve Barnes. The rules for the debate have been, of course, agreed to by both candidates. Prior to the debate, each nominee will have 1 minute to respond to questions. The candidates will then have 30 seconds for rebuttal if they elect to do so. And at the conclusion of questioning, each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement. As always, the order of candidate appearance was determined before the debate in a coin toss that was witnessed by the candidates or their representatives. Our first question tonight will come from Ms. Terrell, and it goes to Mr. Gibson.
Okay, thank you. And this question is actually for both of you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm wondering, in your opinion, what are the failures of the current Attorney General's office that's happened in that office, if any at all? And if so, how would you do things differently? And be specific.
Thank you so much for that question. Thank you so much to Arkansas PBS. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my lovely wife, Mandy, and my two boys, Jack and Jude. There are several things that I would do much, much differently. The first of all, my vision for the Attorney General's office is to return that office to being one of the top law firms in the state, to remove the politics, to not be a partisan political shop, but the best law firm in the entire state of Arkansas, representing the interests of Arkansans in courtrooms around the state like I've been doing for 23 years. Another thing I'd like to change is that the advertisements that our current Attorney General and past Attorneys General have run in this state, ostensibly for public service announcements, that they've often been partisan and political. Using the taxpayers' money, I'll always be a good steward of that money that's received from lawsuits or settlements, and I won't run those kind of ads unless there's a public declaration of emergency. I've even suggested a moratorium on those ads 30, 60, 90 days before any primary general election to avoid the appearance of impropriety.
Mr. Griffin, you have 1 minute, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you all for letting us have the opportunity. I want to thank my wife, Elizabeth, who's here, my 3 kids. Hopefully, they're in school. They're not here, but thank you all for having me. Anybody that knows me knows that I'm going to do things the way I do them and not copy. In the Army, we have a saying, after you analyze the way something is conducted, we ask, do we improve it or do we sustain it? I think there will be things that I sustain, but there are also things I would do differently. I believe that the ad campaign, particularly the public service announcement campaign that cost millions of dollars, was a waste of spending, should not have happened. I've shown that I can be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. I cut my budget in the Lieutenant Governor's office. I cut the staff in half. I will elevate the opinion section, and I will be much more engaged with the legislature, helping them work on legislation so that if I ever have to defend it, it will be on solid legal ground.
Time, sir. Mr. Gibson, back to you for 30 seconds.
In my 23 years of practicing law, I've learned one immutable truth, and that the only currency that you have in the practice of law is your reputation for fairness and honesty in the cases that you handle, the way you deal with your fellow attorneys, and a sense of collegiality and cooperation. I want to bring that sense of collegiality and that integrity that I've built over those 23 years of practice to the Attorney General's office. I think it's very key because it builds trust with the people of Arkansas. It builds trust in that office that you'll always do the right thing for Arkansans.
Mr. Griffin, back to you for 30.
Well, here's the bottom line. As the president of the Senate as the lieutenant governor and serving in that role as the presiding officer, I've had to work with Democrats and Republicans. I've had to put the partisan label to the side. Yes, I'm elected as a Republican, but in the role as president of the Senate, I had to be a fair arbiter. I will be that way as Attorney General. Yes, I'm running as a Republican, but first and foremost, I want to be the state's attorney, which is not a partisan role.
And our next question from Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Mr. Griffin.
Thank you for both of you as well. You've both shared a little bit about your backgrounds, but let's go ahead and dig a little deeper into that. What makes you qualified to be the state's lead attorney, Mr. Griffin?
Well, first of all, I will be ready on day one to be the state's attorney general. I have been a federal prosecutor on more than one occasion. I have been a military prosecutor. I've been an attorney for 26 years in the United States military and am now the chief legal advisor to a two-star general at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I've been a member of Congress on the House Judiciary Committee. I have worked in the federal government and now in the state government and also in the private sector. I have a breadth of experience that I will bring to this job. I also think the relationships that I've developed in the legislature as lieutenant governor will benefit me greatly as attorney general.
Mr. Gibson.
In 23 years of law practice, almost a quarter century, that's a little hard for me to say out loud, but I've tried over 100 cases to verdict. I've represented individuals just like all of you out there tonight or this morning in cases all across Arkansas. I have litigation experience in Arkansas courtrooms. I've been in leadership positions that attorneys have elevated me to. I've been the president of the Arkansas Trial Lawyers Association, been involved in lots of public policy debates in that role. I've been on the board of trustees of the Arkansas Bar, where my fellow attorneys entrusted me with preserving and furthering interests in behalf of the legal profession. I've been in Arkansas courtrooms representing people who've suffered great loss. We can compare our track record on litigation experience. You can compare Mr. Griffin's record as to what cases he's handled in Arkansas courtrooms. It's on Court Connect, it's public, and the answer is 0. I have handled many cases in Arkansas, and I'll be ready to have that litigation experience and serve the people of Arkansas.
Back to Mr. Griffin, 4:30.
We certainly can compare our litigation experience, and that is one thing to look at. But a lot of the military stuff that I have done has involved either litigation or assisting with adversarial proceedings. I have also been in litigation as a commercial attorney. But here's the deal. This job is not about litigation. Most attorneys general aren't litigating every day. This job is about judgment and leadership. And that's where I have the advantage, because my opponent has not demonstrated the judgment over the years and has not demonstrated the same track record.
Call time. Governor, Mr. Gibson, over to you for 30.
I do think leadership is important. You know, Bear Bryant once said famously that when we win, everybody else gets the credit. When we lose, it's my fault. What we've seen over the last 8 years of a Republican governor, attorney general, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, House and Senate, we've seen crime skyrocket in our state. And instead of trying to take a responsibility for that and saying we messed up, we're going to do better, the Republican Party is blamed. Honestly, I don't know who they're blaming for the crime issues. But leadership means taking responsibility when things don't go right.
Question for both of you gentlemen, beginning with Mr. Gibson. The incumbent Attorney General is wont to note that she has filed 100 pieces of litigation or more against the incumbent presidential administration. Beginning with you, sir, how much of that litigation was necessary? Are there individual actions that you would say, no, I would not take that action?
Absolutely, and that's a great question, Steve. I think a great deal of that litigation has been frivolous. I think it's been political grandstanding. I think it's been unnecessary. It shows the difference between political rhetoric and law. Politicians can say a lot of things, a lot of empty rhetoric, but when you have to actually go to court with evidence and facts and testimony, that political rhetoric does not work. The issues that the current Attorney General has taken against the Biden administration has shown that they're more interested in politics than good governance, than justice. They've done these things involving elections, challenging the other states' elections. As I travel around the state, that is one thing that I hear from Republicans, Democrats, all across this state, that was simply a bridge too far, a waste of our taxpayer resources, a waste of the resources of the Attorney General's office, and not the kind of action we want out of the Attorney General.
Over to you, Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, well, I think what you've just heard is a partisan answer. Look, I think the truth is some of those lawsuits should have been brought, and some of them shouldn't. In fact, there have been some that I wouldn't have brought, but there have been many where the Attorney General has been successful. And I know her Solicitor General, and he is a highly talented litigator, and he's won some key victories even in the United States Supreme Court. So look, I think if you paint it with a broad brush, you're giving a partisan answer. I think that there are some that were actually very good ideas. And I'll say this, you can't discard that role. Attorneys General have a role in looking at what's coming out of Washington, whether it be executive orders, regulations, laws coming out of Congress, and they are part of the constitutional system. They are part of the checks and balances to push back when there's federal overreach, whether it's from the Biden administration or the next administration. That's an important role.
Got to go back to Mr. Gibson, 4:30.
Without any specifics, I really don't know what specific plans or actions that he's talking about. But what I do know that is wrong, and what I do know that politicians do, is predetermine their course of action. I know as a practicing attorney that making that determination before you know the facts and apply the applicable law, you get yourself into trouble. What we've heard from our current Attorney General and from Mr. Griffin is that they are angling for the federal government. They want to take on the federal government. I won't hesitate if there's something that hurts Arkansans, but I won't do it as a matter of course and as a matter of politics.
And back to Mr. Griffin.
Well, look, anybody that knows me knows that I'm not going to willy-nilly file lawsuits if there's no legal basis. That's just ridiculous. The bottom line is you have to be vigilant and look at what's coming out of the federal government. That's not predetermining. That's doing your job. If you see something that should be litigated, you litigate it. If there's no legal case and it's all politics, you shouldn't do it.
Ms. Terrell has the next question, and he goes first to Mr. Griffin.
Okay. I want to kind of focus on what's motivating you to want to run for this office, beyond what qualifies you for it, but what's motivating you? And Mr. Griffin, you initially set out to run for governor. And then when Sarah Huckabee Sanders entered the race, you determined that you would run for AG. So what has motivated you to now want to be the Attorney General?
I love public service. I love this state. This is not a state where I work and then I drive home some other state. This is where I live. I've lived on the same street for 21 years in Little Rock. I've got 3 kids. I may look like a grandpa, but I've got 3 young kids, 15, 12, and 4. That's right, 4. This is their future. In the last 2 years, there have been 2 attempted murders within about 3 football fields of my front door. This is personal to me. If I were not serving in public office, I would still be, you probably wouldn't invite me to participate in a debate, but I would still be extremely passionate and forward-leaning because I live here. And I love my city and I love my state. And I don't care what capacity, I will always be engaged.
Mr. Gibson, 1 minute, sir.
One of my favorite pieces of scripture is Matthew 25:40, which says, "That which ye do for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, ye also do for me." And that's really the reason I want to run for Attorney General. And it's really the reason I've wanted to become a lawyer in the first place. It's because I know I've seen suffering in my life, as we all have. I've seen people struggle, maybe the loss of a loved one, maybe a business problem they can't come out of. And I've seen how the compassionate practice of law and serving the least of these achieves so much for our state, for my clients, for everyone in the state. It's what drives me and why I want to be Attorney General. There is no other office that touches more lives than the Attorney General's office. There's no office that impacts more people on a day-to-day basis, for everywhere from their utility bills down to everything they do on a daily basis across the country or across the state. I want to serve the least of these. I have not seen that out of our legislature. What I have seen is punching down against people who do not need that, but need grace.
Another 30 seconds for Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, look, I grew up with some great examples. I've come from a long line of ministers. My dad is 86 years old, and he's a retired minister. My mom's an early childhood teacher. They demonstrated servant leadership every single day. Not making a lot of money, but helping folks their entire lives. So I grew up with that example. I didn't have to join the military. I joined in 1996, and I've been in ever since. Service is what I do, and I'm doing it now, and I want to continue doing it if the people of Arkansas give me that opportunity.
Another half minute now for Mr. Gibson.
To go back to the original question, I was talking about changing races. I know Mr. Griffin had declared to run for governor and had then decided to drop down to the Attorney General's office. The question I have that's as important for why do you want this job is, do you really want this job? Or do you just want to have some kind of role in government? My desire is to help the least of these, not to find a landing spot, not to find my second choice. My entire career, my entire legal career has led to this time.
Got a call time there. Miss Munoz has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Gibson.
Okay, thank you. So before we did all of these debates this week, we also allowed our viewers to submit questions via social media. So this next question comes from a viewer in Pulaski and Hot Spring County. Arkansas law prohibiting abortion makes no exception for rape or incest victims. Should the law be amended to permit abortion in those cases? Mr. Gibson, you first.
With the caveat that the Attorney General does not have, he or she cannot say which laws he or she will enforce and which they won't. I will say that as I've traveled this state from Bentonville to Lake Village, our archaic trigger law is front of mind to people all across this state, and they are angry. They are angry that they were going to have government-mandated forced pregnancy in cases of incest, in cases of rape, and that there's not even an exception for the health of the mother, it's the life of the mother, which leads us to all kinds of impossible situations, some of which have been reported. It's a barbaric law. Even our own governor, who signed the law, says now he doesn't like it. I appreciate Mr. Griffin. Finally, I read it in the paper the other day in the Democrat Gazette. He says he opposes the law and its form and wishes there was a rape or incest exception. But when the bill went through the Senate, of which he presides, he said nothing. He didn't do anything to stop it. Only now, when there may be political repercussions, has he come out against it.
Over to Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, once again, my opponent doesn't understand the role of the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate, the Lieutenant Governor, is not engaged in the middle of the debate publicly. You have to be a fair arbiter. With the Democrats and the Republicans, and even with the factions that are within the Republican Party. What I have said is I have a pro-life record. I was 100% pro-life in Congress, 100% pro-life as Lieutenant Governor. I have always supported exceptions for rape and incest. I did not say I oppose the law. I simply said, as Attorney General, I will defend whatever laws I have to defend. My personal preference in this area is an exception for rape and incest. There's some discussion about this among legislators, and I believe that there will be more discussion when we have our session.
You have another 30, Mr. Gibson.
That session does not start for several more months. How many women have to be put in impossible positions before we take action? How many women have to have that conversation with a doctor who then has to get on the phone with the hospital's lawyers about, can we do this procedure? This law will cause harm. And just saying we'll look at this in the future is not leadership. That's passing the buck. When the chips were down, when the decisions were made, the Republican Party did nothing.
Mr. Griffin, you have another 30 seconds, sir.
Yeah, I'm not sure what action Mr. Gibson is proposing. We don't have a full-time legislature. Thank goodness. I don't think we should. I like the Constitution as it currently is. Now, the governor could call a special session if he wanted to do that. That's up to him. We all know that the lieutenant governor cannot call a special session. That's not one of the roles enumerated in the state constitution. So this will be taken up, I believe, but I'm not a legislator. But I'll defend the law in the role as Attorney General.
Got to call time, Mr. Griffin. To both gentlemen, beginning with Mr. Griffin, as a matter of law, as your own legal philosophy, your own legal schooling and education, beginning with Mr. Griffin, was Roe properly decided back in the 70s, and does the repeal of Roe infringe on women's rights improperly?
No, it was not properly decided. It was, to be blunt with you, it was made up out of whole cloth. And I think that answers your second question. Look, just because you think something should exist doesn't mean it's in the Constitution. There are a lot of things that you may want, but that doesn't mean they're in the Constitution. You can't just make stuff up. And that's a particular philosophy. Those who see the Constitution as this morphing, living document basically mean that as times change and as circumstances change, they can just create things out of thin air. And that's what was done with the right to privacy as it was laid out in the Roe case. And it's been a long time coming. It should be with the states. It's with the states now.
Got to go to Mr. Gibson. You have 1 minute, sir.
The only thing I can say to the people of Arkansas is that with this philosophy, take cover. Because under this philosophy, you'll see all kinds of rights under attack. There will come after many rights that we hold dear and have become woven into the fabric of our country and of our state. I do believe that original decision of Roe was founded upon sound legal precedent. I do believe that it would become, over the last 50 years, deeply ingrained in our culture and in the decisions that women make. So the only people that belong in that decision-making room are a woman, her doctor, and if she so chooses, her pastor. Placing government into that room to make those decisions for women is wrong. It's an overreach. We started talking about overreach a little bit already. That is the most egregious form of overreach, and it's improper.
Mr. Griffin, you have another 30.
Well, my opponent misses a fundamental point. There are 3 people in the room, and one of them can't speak. And that's the problem with his view of the world. His view is, as long as the mouth is shut on the baby, it's not a person. And I just disagree with it. And, you know, the great news is most Arkansans totally disregard what he said. And if you want to amend the Constitution, you don't just wake up with a view of what it should be and write it in a court decision. You try to amend it. And if you can't get it amended,
calling time.
Try again.
Mr. Gibson, 30 seconds.
No, I think that what we have to do, and what I think the people in Arkansas want, is to have women make these choices. Women have the right to their bodily autonomy. Women have the right to make these choices. It's a matter of health, it's a matter of safety, and I'll always protect that as your Attorney General.
Our next question from Ms. Terrell, and it goes first to Mr. Gibson.
As my colleague Christina pointed out, we did receive a lot of viewer questions. This one is inspired from one of our viewers in Benton County. What is your view on former President Trump's involvement, if any, in the January 6th insurrection? And if that were, or if that had happened in the state of Arkansas, would you prosecute?
Thank you for that question. January 6th was the day I decided I wanted to run for Attorney General. It was the day that I sat in my office and thought, our country is falling apart. And it's time to do something. It's time to get off the couch. It's time to put your phone down. It's time to get in the game. And the best way that I could do that is to run for Attorney General. The legal system is running its course. There have been many, many convictions of people that were involved and engaged in that horrible day, that attack on our country. There will be more. The January 6th Commission has requested Mr. Trump to attend those hearings, and justice will run its course. We'll see where that goes. But if it happened in our capital, If there had been insurrection in our capital, of course we would prosecute. Of course we would urge county prosecutors to take action. Of course we would want to back the blue. You can't back the blue if you don't call out what happened on January 6th as for what it was, a direct attack on our democracy, our law enforcement, and our institutions.
Mr. Griffin, 1 minute.
I was disgusted by what happened on January 6th. I said it back then. I've said it since then. I've slept in those buildings. I worked as a staffer in those buildings. To me, those are a sacred place within our democracy. And anyone who is found to have violated the law on that day should be prosecuted. Period. Case closed. Over. I'm still disgusted by it. Look, I've worn the uniform. I lived 2 blocks from that place. And I talked to a lot of other members of the military who were also disgusted by everything that happened. The vice president's life was put at risk. Lots of others' lives were put at risk. It was a dark day, a disgusting day, and I hope that all the people prosecuted get the maximum sentence.
Time, sir. Mr. Gibson, 30 seconds.
Yes, what I've heard from a lot of candidates, Republican candidates, is that we just need to move on. Let's just move on from this issue. Until justice is done, that cannot happen. Until all those that are held accountable for the actions they took, we cannot and should not just simply move on. Justice requires that they be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Justice requires that the truth come out. And justice requires accountability. For those who think that they are above the rules, simple accountability feels like persecution.
Back to Mr. Griffin for another 30 seconds.
I'll make sure it's very clear. I think anyone heard my answer. No, I didn't say move on. There's no one more pro-justice, pro-police, and pro-locking up violent criminals than Tim Griffin. Which reminds me that the reason a lot of our criminal justice system here is such a disaster is because there are people in government who are elected who do not believe we need to lock violent criminals up. And they're going to have a chance to be on the record, I believe, next year in the legislative session.
Christina Munoz has our next question, and it goes first to Mr. Griffin.
Thank you. So one of the numerous lawsuits that we've already talked about between Arkansas and this current administration is regarding student loan debt. So do you believe in this particular case, legally speaking, that the president acted beyond his authority, or that it is a benefit to a group of Arkansans financially? Mr. Griffin.
Well, more than one thing can be true at the same time. When you give people thousands of dollars, of course it's beneficial. I didn't get that. I had over $100,000 in loans. I worked my tail off. I'd have to ask my wife, I think I was in my 40s when I finally got them paid off. So yeah, I resent the fact that others got that wiped away. And millions of people have worked their tails off the way it ought to be. You take out a loan, you fulfill your commitment. So, yeah, if people benefited from it, sure. Do I think it's right? No. Do I think it's legal? I think there's a good case to be made. And attorneys general are making that case. It's a perfect example of where, when there's overreach, you can challenge. It's part of our checks and balances. It's part of our constitutional system. I think it was a horrible idea, sends the wrong signal to people.
Mr. Gibson.
I want to be real clear because I think this is an issue where the political rhetoric muddies the water. This student loan forgiveness plan is not just for people who went to expensive private schools. If you're in Arkansas and you went to SAU Tech and got some welding training, Northwest Arkansas Community College and got nursing training, you may be eligible. It's not just for what some people have argued nationally, for the rich or for people who are wealthy already. There are many of us, working class people here in Arkansas who might benefit from this. So look into it. Look into whether you will be eligible for that student loan forgiveness. Now, the other issue is one of power. Is this a valid exercise of power? The COVID-19 pandemic it was one of the most life-changing events of my entire life. It affected us economically, it affected us, our public health, it affected us in so many ways. And it triggered the emergency powers to take action even in an economic emergency. And that's what the basis of power is. I think the litigation will be unsuccessful.
Back to Mr. Griffin for another 30 seconds.
Well, let's be real clear. If you're wealthy or rich, you're not taking out a $10,000 student loan. You're just not. And so it's just not about who benefits. Anybody that gets 10 grand benefits. That's not the issue. The issue is whether, after millions of people have worked their tails off to pay back their loans, sometimes over decades. I mean, I remember my wife and I think we about celebrated when that $354 or whatever dollar a month payment that I paid forever.
Time, sir.
When we got that paid off.
Time. Over to Mr. Gibson for 30.
Yeah, so I want to reiterate that, sometimes people who do have means have to take out student loans still. It just all depends. Every circumstance is different. So I think lumping everyone together into classes as to the haves and have-nots is not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is for people in Arkansas. There are plenty of people out there who need this help. Young people, older people, it doesn't matter. It cuts across age, gender, whatever. There are people out there that need this help so that we can get our economy continuing on track.
Question for both gentlemen, of course, and it begins with Mr. Gibson. Sir, in reversing Roe, the Supreme Court has indicated that it is willing to disregard or revisit what was considered a precedent. Some are now arguing that same-sex marriage should be revisited, reconsidered by the court. Give us your thoughts.
I think that'd be
Would you support that?
Oh, no, certainly not. And that's what I warned about a little earlier, Steve, when I spoke about take cover, is that there are many rights that have become ingrained in our society. Interracial marriage, same-sex marriage, lots of these things that are based upon the similar rights to privacy in Roe. They may be on the ballot if politicians are allowed to go after them. If you're being intellectually honest about the reasoning in Dobbs, they are very much on the chopping block. And the question that Arkansans have to ask themselves is that the way we want to go as a state? Do we want to go back to times when we couldn't have interracial marriage? Do we want to have these policies that seem to have gone the way of the past? I don't think we do. That's why I think the harm that could have been, that was inflicted by the Dobbs decision won't stop there. Because as we have all seen, career politicians and creatures of Washington will always try to make those political points.
Mr. Griffin, 1 minute.
Yeah, so I believe that this is settled law. The Supreme Court hasn't called for this to be revisited. There is an individual member of the Supreme Court who opined in this area in dicta, but the idea that this is somehow about to be revisited is not true. I supported, like President Clinton and President Obama and so many, I supported the idea that marriage was between a man and a woman, but this is settled law. And I don't know what the interracial marriage has to do with this particular. It doesn't have anything to do with this at all. I think that is trying to push some buttons in an election year. So I don't see it as a major issue.
Mr. Gibson, back to you for 30 seconds.
I'm a little confused as to what's considered settled law and what's not, because Roe versus Wade had been the law of the land for over 50 years. If you're saying that the Loving case out of Virginia or other cases involving social issues are settled law, but this one's not, that's not being intellectually honest. The intellectual honesty that I was talking about is that if you believe there is no right to privacy, there are ways you can challenge all of these other cases. I believe they'll be coming. I believe there will be litigation. There's already been talk in state legislatures across our country. That's why I said to Arkansans, take cover.
Now, Mr. Griffin, 30 seconds for a follow-up.
Yeah, so there are the reasons that there are distinctions between these different cases is because the law is different. And there are some things that are settled law, and there are other things that were never based on law in the first place and were made up. One justice talked about the right to privacy that was used in Roe v. Wade as emanating from the penumbras. That's where he found it. Didn't see it, just it was emanating from the penumbras.
Time. We want to pause at this moment during the debate to let you know, remind you that the candidates can participate in a press conference directly following the debate. And to watch that, you can scan the QR code on your screen with your mobile device. You will see that QR code periodically through the balance of our debate. Ms. Terrell has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Griffin.
Okay, let's talk about the root causes of crime in our state. Mr. Griffin, obviously this question will be for both of you, but Mr. Griffin, you talk a lot on Twitter, on your Twitter page, about early release of parolees and them getting out of prison committing these violent crimes. This is, in terms of the early release, that's been going on for a long time, but we do know over the last 8 years, we've had a Republican regime that could have changed this. So I'm wondering what has gone wrong. And for you, Mr. Gibson, you talked about hopelessness. I'd like to get a better understanding of what hopelessness in your view is, and if that's really the root cause of crime, and how do you fix that?
Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, so clearly not enough people agree with me on reforming the revolving door system. I think we're getting there. The federal system has no parole. You serve 85% of your sentence, you can get up to 15% good time. The problem in our state is someone may get 10 years for sexual assault of a minor and they're out in 24 months, as is one specific case. How do we know they got out? Because they're back in again for internet stalking of a minor. This happens all the time. People do a mere fraction of their sentence. Now, root causes. I've served on the board of Pathway to Freedom, a prison ministry. I've led worship at Wrightsville Prison at least twice. I was on the board of Our House Shelter for the Working Homeless. I was on the board of Big Brothers Big Sisters. I've seen up close a lot of these root causes, and we have to deal with rehabilitation in a meaningful way. In mental health, we've got to expand that capacity.
Throwing the flag,
Mr.
Mr. Griffin. I've got to call time. Mr. Gibson, 1 minute.
Ms. Terrell put her finger right on it. We've had a Republican governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, House, Senate. And what have they done to curb our crime problem? Nothing. Nothing. They merely talk about it on Twitter and say that we have a parole problem. I hear Mr. Griffin talk about our system's broken, our system doesn't work. But when you've been in power for 8 years, you are the system. And if that system is broken, it's time to take responsibility for it and take time to change it. I still don't know who he's blaming for this parole problem. I don't know if it's talking about the Republican legislature. I don't know if he's talking about the governor. I'm a little bit confused. But to your question about hopelessness and what I mean by that, it's multifaceted. I think it's about economic opportunity. I think it's about having educational programs that allow people to achieve their best. And there's a feeling of that hopelessness when you don't have those economic opportunities, say in the Delta or in South Arkansas. And it leads to this sense of hopelessness and problems moving forward.
Over to Mr. Griffin for 30 seconds.
I'm from South Arkansas, and so is my wife, so we're very familiar with the economic struggles of South Arkansas and do everything we can to address them. I can tell you this, the system that my opponent refers to is the system that was developed through Democrat rule for years. Should it have been changed yesterday, 6 years ago? Yes. 8 years ago? Yes. And I've pushed for this. It hasn't been, and it's because too many people agree with him.
Mr. Gibson, 30 seconds.
It's not leadership to look at the last 8 years and blame anyone but the current administration and the Republican Party. They've dominated all the constitutional offices, House, Senate. They've done nothing. He talks about the parole problem. It might interest the people of Arkansas to know that the parole board is appointed by the executive, of which Mr. Griffin is second in line. Has he asked people to be appointed to that board? They're approved and confirmed by the Senate, of which he oversees. If there's a problem with our parole board, it's been on his watch.
Christina Munoz with a question first for Mr. Gibson.
Yes, this is another viewer question, this one coming from Montgomery County. Do you support the proposed amendment legalizing recreational marijuana in the state of Arkansas? Mr. Gibson, to you first.
Again, this is one where the Attorney General, there may be litigation, so I want to give that caveat. So as a matter of policy, I'll give my thoughts. I do support the idea of recreational marijuana, and here's why. There's 30 some odd states out of 50 that have some form of marijuana legalization, medical, recreational. We have medical marijuana here in Arkansas. The train may not have left the station, but they're piling the coal on and the steam's pumping. This is the way that the country is going. This is the way the country is moving. This will do a couple things. It will put money in our state coffers. It will bolster our economy. And more importantly, if you're serious about crime in Arkansas, what this would do, it would be to free up resources so law enforcement can not deal with nonviolent drug offenses, but go after violent crimes, go after things that affect our safe streets, our safe neighborhoods, and our safe schools. I do support it. It's imperfect. It's an imperfect amendment, but I don't think we should make the perfect the enemy of the good. I think it would be a net positive across the board for the state of Arkansas.
Tim Griffin, 1 minute.
Let me say this first about crime. My opponent misunderstands the role of the lieutenant governor. We have one governor at a time. We have one attorney general at a time. I can tell you this, if you're a Republican and you have not been part of the solution on changing, transforming our criminal justice system, the parole system, yeah, I'll put the blame on you. I can tell you, though, I think you're going to see, with all the new folks coming in, I think you're going to see massive change in this area as soon as the new legislature is seated, and I'm helping on that right now. On the marijuana initiative, of course I oppose this. This is ridiculous. It's to say that we're going to get more money for police. That's like saying I'm going to build more hospitals so I can make more people sick. You're going to create more crime. Here's the bottom line. We've all heard probably of Moonbeam, Jerry Brown.
Hurry up, sir. I've got. All right, let me go back to Mr. Gibson.
No, I know that Mr. Griffin has often talked about Jerry Brown, the governor of California. Let's not forget that California's got the 4th largest economy in the world. So I don't think that just poo-pooing and moving past the economic benefits is sound. I do think they're there, and I do think they're real. And I do think that what law enforcement will be able to do is to say, okay, we can now focus on the things that affect us in our homes, in our schools, in our neighborhoods. Those violent crimes that affect people all across our state. I think that's net positive for Arkansas.
Now back to Mr. Griffin for another 30.
He's not speaking facts. So we check with the corrections. There are fewer than 10 people in our prisons who are there because of simple possession of marijuana. The idea that this is what folks are spending, that the law enforcement spending their days on, is ridiculous. I drive past people smoking pot every day, and it's recreational is not even legal. Look, if we're going to have a bunch of poets in Arkansas, it may not matter as much if they're all high. But if we want people doing high-tech jobs that they've got to pass a drug test for, we're going to have a really hard time recruiting aerospace industry and car industry if they're high on pot.
Governor, out of time. Question for, of course, both gentlemen. And Mr. Griffin, we'll begin with you. Amendment 3 on the ballot, a religious freedom amendment. It has been advocated by a great many in the clergy, obviously, but opposed by a great many in the clergy as well as in the bar. It would bar the state from imposing on religion a burden or a burdensome exercise absent, I'm paraphrasing, absent a compelling reason. Is that not an invitation to continued litigation? Is that too vague?
People, as my opponent knows as a trial lawyer, people litigate over all kinds of stuff. That's not really a test. You don't avoid something because someone's going to sue. People sue all the time. So that's not really the issue. Look, religious freedom is one of our most fundamental rights, and it's enshrined in the United States Constitution. Thank goodness. This is a belt and suspenders approach. It's not doing anything here really separate from the United States Constitution, but it's saying as a state, we want to also enshrine it in our state constitution. Look, our state constitution, it's been amended for just about everything. I mean, you name it. It's got all kind of stuff in there that should have never been in a state constitution. That's why I'm supporting Amendment Issue 2. But this is a perfect example of the sort of thing that should be in the state constitution.
And with that, over to Mr. Gibson for a minute, sir.
I think one of the things that Mr. Griffin just said, I think sums it up. It's not really doing anything. We live in America. We have religious freedom. You know, there was an article in the paper this morning, Jerry Cox of the Family Council, who I've worked with on lots of legal issues, said, well, there's not really been any kind of attack on religion that this would protect them from. We just want to be doubly careful. So I think Mr. Griffin's correct. This won't really do anything. You know, we're free to practice our faith in our own ways, in our own time. And I think that's something that we enjoy as Americans. And it's nothing that we have to put in our Constitution because we already have it. I'm very active in my church, and I know that Mr. Griffin is too. And I think it's something that we have to take internally. I think it's something that we have to have within ourselves. And it's not anything that we have to have political grandstanding, or certainly it's not some amendment to commemorate what our Bill of Rights already has.
Mr. Griffin, you have another 30 seconds.
Yeah, I never said it won't do anything. As my opponent knows, when you sign a waiver before you jump out of a plane, it's not going to stop litigation, but it's certainly going to prolong it, make it more complicated. I think that this, as I said, is a belt and suspenders approach because of what Arkansas sees so many times coming from the East Coast and the West Coast. A lot of the bad stuff that starts there ends up here. And I think that people are scared. And I think they've got reason to be.
Time back to Mr. Gibson, 30 seconds.
I'm not jumping out of an airplane, I can promise you that. But, you know, I think the converse is also true. You know, Mr. Griffin is saying that the bad stuff starts on the coast and comes here. Having dealt with attorneys general across the nation, a lot of the bad stuff starts here. And a lot of the bad legislation starts here in Arkansas and goes other places. That's the problem. I don't think this is necessary. I don't think this is something that the people clamored for. I think this is just more politics. I think this was people realizing that they wanted to pound their chest this amendment, and I just don't think it's necessary.
Another question from Ms. Terrell. First to Mr. Gibson.
Okay, well, Arkansas is the first state in the nation enacting a law on gender-confirming care. As both of you know, there is a trial going on in Little Rock challenging the constitutionality of this law. And you have many parents who are saying that taking away care could be detrimental to their children. Knowing that, do you feel that this law should be reversed or revised, and why?
Very timely question. As you say, there's litigation currently in Eastern District Federal Court. This is a case where the difference between politics and law is laid bare. This is where the empty rhetoric from politicians who want to pass harmful legislation like this is going to run into trouble when it comes under legal scrutiny. I think a really telling issue on transgender care was borne out when our current Attorney General sat down with Jon Stewart on national TV and to talk about this issue. You're not going to be able to go into court in the Eastern District of Arkansas and make a political argument or grandstand or talk about empty rhetoric or all things you can't prove. You've got to come in with facts. You've got to come in with evidence. You've got to come in with medical testimony. I think this is going to be hard to uphold because a judge is going to make a decision based on the facts and the law, not politics. I don't think it's going to be supported, and I expect it to fail. Although there will be appeals.
60 seconds, Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, look, the wiseness, the wisdom of accepting an interview with a comic is something I'm not going to comment on. I think that interview speaks for itself. Having said that, look, this is eminently reasonable, and I think it may end up at the United States Supreme Court. Whoever is elected will have to defend it. What you're saying here is you're not banning transgender surgery and gender modification surgery and medicines for adults. You're saying that kids like mine at 12 and 15, who, by the way, some wake up with a new personality every day. Sometimes I meet 10 different people in the same week in the form of their personality. They're growing, they're changing. What it says is we've chosen to protect minors from life-altering, irreversible surgery and medical treatment.
Out of time. Back to Mr. Gibson.
Going to totally agree about the teenager thing. That's something that we all are going to deal with. I've seen that firsthand, so has my wife. But the issue here is that's very important is it's important to talk to these families. I've gone out, this is nothing that I have a great background in, but I've talked to families about the care that they need. And what he's talking about, this invasive surgery, is so far down the chain of events. There's counseling. There's hormone therapy, where they just don't jump in and allow a minor to have an invasive surgery. And talking to these families, sometimes it's been life-saving. The suicide rate among transgender is astronomical.
Out of time on that one. Ms. Munoz has the next question. First for Mr. Griffin.
Rebuttal still from Griffin.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Rebuttal time. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Look, this is not. We're still on the last question.
30 seconds. Yes.
This is not an easy issue, but at the end of the day, let's be real blunt with the people of Arkansas. We're talking about cutting off, transforming, whatever technical term you want to, altering permanently the genitalia of 14, 15, 16-year-olds, removing the breast of a young woman who's not yet an adult. That's what we're talking about here.
That's 30 seconds, sir. Back to you, sir. No, wait, but our next question now. I'm sorry.
No, that's
Ms.
okay.
Munoz. Ms.
Yes, sir.
Munoz has a question, and it goes to Mr. Griffin.
Yes, sir. So clearly, you both are very passionate about your beliefs, your ideals. Some are along political lines, some are not. As Attorney General, how will you separate those beliefs, ideals, everything that you stand for with regard to not only following the law, but interpreting the law? And we go to Mr. Griffin first.
Yeah, look, this is an area where I actually think we agree. This is an office that has a partisan label. We certainly believe very differently and would pursue different policies, no question about it. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt when he says that he's going to try to do the right thing on the law. Of course, that's what I have to do as a military lawyer. That's what I've done as president of the Senate when I've had to interpret rules. Many of the rulings I gave from the chair in the state Senate, I didn't like. Some of them I really didn't like, and some of them I liked, but I did what was right based on my interpretation of the law. I will certainly pursue conservative policies as AG, because a lot of what the AG does is pursue policies, but I will pursue the law in a nonpartisan way because that's the job.
That's time, sir. Over to Mr. Gibson.
He makes a great point, and that this office is a little bit weird. I will be the first to admit it, and that it does mix impartial law and legal decisions with politics. And it's odd, and that's why a couple of times in this debate I've given the caveat that the Attorney General doesn't get to pick and choose, and I want to be careful because there may be pending litigation just for that very reason, is that because you might have to get involved as the Attorney General with a lot of the laws that we're talking about. However, I think Mr. Griffin, I will agree with him on another thing, is that there's nothing wrong with a leader. There's nothing wrong with a leader coming out and supporting certain policies that you think are important. It can get a little sticky as the Attorney General, but I do think it's important. I think that's part of being a leader, is going out there, telling Arkansans what you believe, what you think is important, and what you'll do as Attorney General. I've always tried to do this, to cultivate that sense of fair play in my practice of law. I'm proud over the course of these years. I think I've got that good reputation as an advocate, a zealous advocate, but also a fair dealer.
Another 30 seconds, Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, look, I think that policy, priorities, all of those sorts of things, follow your values, follow your beliefs, and as a conservative, those are going to be my priorities in a very different way than my opponent. That's not necessarily, depending on the issue, that's not partisanship. That is part of who you are, the way you view the world. And that's expected. And I will certainly be a conservative Attorney General,
that's time,
but not irresponsibly, inappropriately partisan.
Mr. Gibson.
I'm committed to always doing the right thing. I tell my wife all the time that one of the things I try to do is every night when we go to bed is to think that I do everything right for my clients, my family, my kids, try to do the right thing. That's what I'll do as Attorney General. I want to have that sense of trust with the people of Arkansas, that I'll always keep your interest at heart. I'll always try to do the right thing. We can disagree on certain policies, but right and wrong and justice, the concept of justice doesn't waver.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your responses. Time now for closing statements. And again, as was predetermined by the flip of a coin, Mr. Griffin, you're first, sir.
Thank you again for this opportunity to be here today. I'm asking for your vote. I will always be accessible as your Attorney General, the way I've always been. My cell phone's the same, 501-837-5190. I continue to hear from people, love to hear from people. But I'm asking for your vote because I'm prepared, maybe like no other AG has been, to start and hit the ground running on day one. That's why former Democrat Attorney General Dustin McDaniel endorsed me. That's why the Fraternal Order of Police have endorsed me. I will be ready on day one. Secondly, I'm the only conservative running for Attorney General. I will continue to fight to reform our criminal justice system, stand shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement. That's why the Fraternal Order of Police have endorsed me. And I will push back against the Biden administration and federal overreach where legally appropriate.
And that's 1
I'm
minute,
asking
sir.
for your vote. Thank you.
That's your minute, sir. Over to Mr. Gibson. You have 60 seconds.
You know, growing up on a dead-end dirt road in Lead Hill, Arkansas, population 274, I never thought that I'd be on this stage with an esteemed panel, a worthy opponent, asking the people of Arkansas for their vote for Attorney General. And in a way, I feel like I've already won. Because I've shown that for kids who may not wear the right clothes, whose parents may not have money, who may not have influence, that there's a way for you to serve your community, your state, and your nation. I want to be an example for those kids who grew up on those dirt roads and who believe in the causes of justice. More than anything, I want to thank my mom and dad, Joe and Janice Gibson, both 30-year teachers in our Arkansas public schools. I hope I made you proud. I'm asking for your vote for Attorney General. I'm Jesse Gibson. I want this job. I can do this job. And I believe in justice above all.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time. And as always, thank you for yours. Our 60 minutes is up. Immediately following this event, you can watch all the Arkansas PBS debates on demand at the Arkansas PBS YouTube channel, on the PBS video app, and on our website. As we mentioned earlier, the candidates have the option to participate just seconds from now in a press conference that directly follows the debate, and that will air on YouTube as part of our live stream. So scan the QR code there on your screen and begin watching on YouTube right now. Again, thanks to our candidates for participating and to our panelists, both here at Reynolds Performance Hall and at home for watching Election Day, November 8th. Thank you.
Major funding for Election 2022 Arkansas PBS Debates is provided by AARP Arkansas, with additional funding provided by the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce.
what we're doing. I'll just take your questions.
If you just want to start off by talking about how you thought the debate went.
I thought it went really well. I think we were able to draw some clear contrasts. I think we were able to give the voters separate and competing visions about how we want the Attorney General's office to perform. I'm proud of how we did. I'm proud of the vision we set out. And I think we set out a vision for Arkansas that is the best way forward.
You talked a little bit about the litigation going on right now with gender conforming care. Can you talk about how you would handle things differently and what your thoughts are?
Yeah, and what my point was that I tried to make during the debate was that this is the difference between politics and law. You can't go into law, into a legal case, with politics, with rhetoric. You've got to come with facts, you've got to come with evidence, you've got to come with testimony. So that's what I think is very important. I know that's what Judge Moody is going to require in his courtroom. I've tried many cases in front of him, going back to when he was a circuit judge in Pulaski County. I know that's what he's going to require, and I know that's what the law requires. I know that's what, if the case goes to the 8th Circuit or ultimately the Supreme Court, that's how it'll be decided.
How do you strike a balance between preventing crime and punishing those who have committed crime?
You got to walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, you've got to be tough on crime. Violent offenders have to be held accountable. But we have got to take steps to stop the revolving door in our recidivism problem. In the Southeast, we stand alone as the highest repeat offender recidivism rate anywhere. We've got to stop that with programs that work. The head of the Department of Corrections went to the legislature and begged for help, begged for programs that work, begged for job assistance, begged for assimilation programs. We've got to do both. It's not an either, it's not an or. Because if we don't work on it goes to overcrowding in our prisons. If we don't work on demand side issues, people going back into the system, we're only left with supply side answers, which is building more jails.
Do you support the expansion of Arkansas's prison system like some Republicans, including the governor, have called for?
Yes, I do. It's a short-term solution, but it's necessary as a stopgap. I think that we have to address, like I said, recidivism problems with good, effective programs. But in the short term, we have to do it. It's not one of those things that we may not be super excited about, regardless of party. But in the short term, until we can get those programs, it's necessary.
How do you view the Attorney General's role in working with the legislature, particularly as it relates to proposals that you might view as unwise or even unconstitutional?
There's two things I think that are the best way to handle that. I think you can do it first with sound legal reasoning, applying facts, a lot of the facts, and making those good, sound legal arguments to the members of the legislature. If that doesn't work, there's other ways. And I think you can argue dollars and cents. We've seen that some of the legislation that's come out of the state of Arkansas has exposed the state to large legal bills. It has exposed the state's treasury to paying people who have challenged those bills. So if the appropriate legal analysis and arguments don't work, maybe dollars and cents in economics will.
I kind of wanted to ask, on your website you kind of talk about how Griffin isn't really necessarily someone who is for veterans' best interest. What do you think whenever he leans on his experience, working for the military, like stuff like that?
Excuse me, appreciate his service. I think that the issue that we really need to remember here is what Mr. Griffin has said he wanted to do as lieutenant governor. He said when he was elected that he doesn't do anything part-time. That he's going to be a full-time lieutenant governor, 24/7, always advocating for the people's interest. Now, not long after making that declaration, he took a job with Purple Strategies, a D.C. consulting and lobbying firm, then later with Brunswick Corporation, another lobbying firm, and has never disclosed to who he has worked for. Why is that important? It calls his judgment into consideration, because we won't know if he has conflicts with litigation, whether it's in Veterans Affairs, whether it's in environmental issues. We don't know who he's worked for while on our taxpayer time. It's time he told us who they were, because there may be conflicts. If we have price gouging situations or Veterans Affairs situations, we need to know who he's worked for to know if there's a conflict or not. And that's a question that needs to be answered before people go to the polls.
What's the first issue you would tackle as Attorney General? I'm
sorry?
What's the first issue you would tackle as Attorney General?
Number one would be to stop the political ads utilizing taxpayer funds that are received from lawsuits and settlements. I've seen those ads. I've seen them run by both parties, including Dustin McDaniel. I opposed them when he did them. I think they were wrong. When Leslie Rutledge has run them, I oppose them as well. I think they're wrong. I think that under the guise of public service announcements, they've been used strictly for politics. Don't want to do that. I want to rebuild the trust, both within the office itself and also with the people. And I think the first step is to take care of those taxpayer funds.
Are there ads that are appropriate?
Yes, sir. Especially in cases of declared emergency. There are cases that are appropriate. You know, it may be helpful to say wear your seatbelt, but I don't think that's something that requires immediate advertisements. Specifically on the issue of elections, I think we can avoid all of this if we adopt what I've proposed, which is 30, 60, 90 days out from primary and general elections, we put a moratorium except for a declared emergency. That way there's no appearance of impropriety.
You've said that you would not let politics or anything enter into the office and that you'd be partisan when it comes to the law. Will that make any clashes when it comes to the abortion law that's in Arkansas?
I don't think so. I mean, both Mr. Griffin and I agreed that as an attorney, you have to say impartial. It's tough, and it's one of the weird things about this office that you run under a political party banner, but that you try to do your best to be neutral, and you have to advocate for truth and fairness and justice. I don't think it'll be a problem. I really don't anticipate it being, because I'll apply the facts to the law and do what's right for Arkansas.
Griffin, in his rebuttal to your argument about abortion, he said that there was a third person in the room who couldn't speak, who should have a say in the situation. Just like legally, what's your perspective on that?
I think that the original Roe case got it correct, and that the viability is the best standard. There has to be a line somewhere, and it has to be determined by that. I think that the decision still belongs with the woman based upon best medical technology, best medical science that she makes with her doctors and her pastor, and I think that's the way it has to be.
When Griffin talks about his motivation for running, you know, he really leans on, you know, I live in Arkansas, I'm a resident. You know, why don't you take that route? Do you think that, you know, your route is has a little bit more substance than, you know, what he's leaning on?
Well, I think you have to live in Arkansas to run for Attorney General, but I don't think any more or less of his positions. You know, mine come, I think, from a more of a, frankly, that's why I quoted the book of Matthew. It comes from a more spiritual place. Not just my residence. I think it comes from my deeply held beliefs that as an attorney, and specifically as Attorney General, your job is to stand up for the least of these, people who need assistance and need grace and not judgment. I think we've gotten, and my mom always said that there's too many people in our world who focus on the wrath and judgment of the Old Testament, not the grace and compassion of the New. And I think, you know, that's why I look at justice and the way I look at why I want to be Attorney General. And that's why I think that my reason for wanting to run comes from a bit of a deeper place than just my zip code.
You have previously said that you plan, if you do take office, not to have a legislative agenda. After hearing Griffin's statements about how he wants to be more involved in legislation, is that something that you're still standing by?
Yeah, I don't think it's the Attorney General's role to be overly vociferous on passing certain legislation. Now, in this campaign, you have to talk about policy. It's just unavoidable. Otherwise, we wouldn't have much of a debate. But I don't think it's appropriate to have a specific legislative agenda when you may be the one that's called to defend or oppose certain laws that you may that may come right back to your desk.
But would you step in and and alert the legislature if you thought they were about to do something that was legally indefensible?
100%. Yes. And again, like I said earlier, you can either do it with reason and law and legal reasoning, or economics, and inform them that you're exposing the state's coffers and the state treasury to attack. Anyone else? I sure appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your time. If there's anyone else, please let me know. Thank you.